Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features The Amazing Spider-Man number 229, cover dated June 1982. So the cover here by John Romita Jr., inked by Al Milgrom, and it is a memorable cover. Nothing can stop the Juggernaut. There he is in silhouette with rim lighting in the background looming over Spider-Man with a spider sense tingling. It would be if you had the Juggernaut coming up behind you. Got the rubble here, and this is Madame Webb, who is a psychic. And this story, the reason it's in my collection is because back in the day in the 90s, Wizard magazine, which I used to pick up every month, would have certain features about like the top 10 X-Men stories ever, the top 10 Amazing Spider-Man stories ever, and this one featured the two-parter by Roger Stern and John Romita Jr. And I was a fan of John Romita Jr. by that point, and I decided, look, I want to read something that is regarded by many as a definitive Spider-Man story, or at least a great Spider-Man story. So I went ahead and I picked up this issue and 22 and 230 as well. So let's get into, well, just one last observation I want to make is the placement of the cover caption, "Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut." I think it works as a placement. I think it works well, but I would like to see this cover without the caption as well. Okay, so let's open this one up to the splash page. And we do begin with a splash page. There are 22 pages of story in this issue, so that's pretty cool. The title of the story is "Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut," and the creative team down here on the scroll: Roger Stern, writer, John Romita Jr. and Jim Mooney credited as artists. Now what that means is that Romita Jr. was producing breakdown art for the book, and Jim Mooney was finishing the art in inks. Joe Rosen, letterer, and Glynis Wine, colorist. So this splash page is pretty freaky when you start to pay attention to certain details, like you can see Spider-Man's toes on his feet there. And what's this animated, as it turns out, spider sitting on his chest. So all is not quite as it seems on the splash page. It began as a dream, it began a nightmare. It's a nightmare that Madame Webb is having. You can see that she's unable to scream there. Her mouth is covered over with flesh. And there is this beast that's hunting her, and that Spider-Man, this version of Spider-Man, is trying to prevent getting to her and killing her. So we got great action by John Romita Jr. and a very interesting creative choice here not to put any borders on the panels. So no borderlines on the panels. That's interesting, conveying that this is a dream, as it turns out. So Spider-Man is bested in the dream. I love this idea. I wonder, was it Stern's? Probably was Stern's, to have this spider separate from Spider-Man himself and following him around here. And then once he loses it, he's taken out by the Juggernaut. Well, it's a premonition of the Juggernaut. And Madame Webb screams in her dream and wakes up. At the sound of the scream, the dream ends. But the dreamer knows the danger has just begun. She's quite blind, but her mind sees things which few can imagine. Some would call her a fraud, a charlatan, but hers is the power to perceive. Now, however dimly, the future. The lettering's actually quite small in this issue. Like here, it's very, very small. So there's actually quite a dense script in terms of narrative, captions, and speech packed in to this issue. And also the issue comes in the Jim Shooter era, where Shooter required editorially that writers and creators, especially writers, take account of the fact that every comic could be any reader's first, picking them up off the newsstand. And so in every issue it had to be clear the names of the characters and their powers. So here we have Peter Parker being rung at night in his third floor apartment in Manhattan's Chelsea district. He's a grad student in this era, and he's fallen asleep with a book on his lap. and the phone rings. It turns out to be Madame Webb, but here he has a thought balloon. Maybe it's some old enemy of mine calling to say he's discovered that I'm really the ever-amazing Spider-Man. Okay, so, you know, it's a way of conveying to new readers potentially that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and so on and so forth. Interesting also that we learn that Madame Webb knows Peter Parker's identity as Spider-Man because of her psychic powers, and that kind of puts one in mind of the fact that obviously someone like Professor X has to know who Spider-Man truly is and keeps it secret. But then what about other Marvel Universe telepaths, like for example the White Queen? You know, she could potentially very mischievously reveal to people Peter Parker's identity as Spider-Man in this era, but it never happened, of course. So he takes the call from Madame Webb, and she says that, listen carefully, someone will threaten my life within the next 24 hours. I don't yet know who or when, but I do know that you're the only one who can possibly protect me, will you? So Peter Parker, hero, agrees. He says, yeah, sure, but how? And she responds on the phone, I'll be in touch when I have a clearer idea of the danger. So she rings off then. And Peter thinks to himself, she certainly doesn't believe in wasting words. Man, I'll never get used to those freaky psychic powers of hers. And the question a reader might have is, why is it that Spider-Man's the only one who can save her? Why not the Fantastic Four? Why not the Avengers? But we'll get to some reasons for that a little later in the issue. It's all thought out very carefully by Roger Stern. So the scene switches to an expensive-looking pleasure craft sailing into New York Harbor. So we've got a view here chosen by John Romita Jr. where we're looking at the southern tip of Manhattan. So we see the Twin Towers here, and that's Battery Park, and over here is the Brooklyn Bridge, and that's John Romita Jr. living in Brooklyn at the time. He's well able to come up with a viewpoint like this, maybe even sketched it out himself in order to draw it into the comic at the time, and it's pretty cool in my book. And then we go into the captain's cabin, and who's the captain? Black Tom Cassidy, pondering his latest scheme. So he is thinking that he wished he knew more about this woman. If I did, I might be persuading her to join us of her own free will, but there's no time for pleasantries. So he's got his partner to bring the lady in question, who is of course Madame Webb, to him, and that partner is Cain Marco, Juggernaut, and he is in full costume here, smashing through the doorway and wooden stairways down to the captain's cabin, and he says, Tom, I'm going stir crazy, I need something to do now. So Black Tom says to him, take it easy, Cain, like I told you before, you'll soon have the action you crave. And Juggernaut says, you call grabbing some old woman action, but and how many times must I tell you I'm not Cain Marco anymore? I haven't been since the day I became the Juggernaut. I need a real workout, Tom. So here's this effective shooters editorial mandate. You know, we're learning the character's full name and alter ego and supervillain identity, the Juggernaut, and we'll learn about the Cyttorak gem as well in the course of the storyline. You pick up everything in one issue regarding the characters. There's no little mysteries. So there's a reference there to the X-Men and how many times they've tried to, they have stymied Juggernaut, but the woman could change all that. So obviously Black Tom, who's the brains of the outfit, is thinking, well, if they could have like a precog on their side, like Madame Webb, maybe it could help them out in their criminal schemes and endeavors. So Juggernaut is properly impatient. He jumps off the side of the yacht into the water, and the indestructible Juggernaut begins walking to Manhattan underwater. That's great work there. Now, one little thing I'd change here is I'd have the Juggernaut going this direction, left to right, rather than seemingly turned around and walking to the left, even though he's dropped down on this side. And then we switch to the top floor Midtown apartment of Madame Webb, where she sits in a state of entrancement, concentrating on the future that may yet be. And she perceives her assailant drawing near, but she can't identify him just yet. Nice colour hold here, blue colour hold for the Juggernaut. And so she decides to alert Spider-Man. And where is Peter Parker? Well, at that moment, just across town, it's the offices of the Daily Bugle there. Great vertical establishing shot. And we have a lot of work on these pages with the interiors of the city room of the Daily Bugle. So there's a secretary there, Glory Grant. She seems to have a bit of a crush on Peter Parker, but he recently has been involved with the Black Cat in the previous issue. In issue 227, 2 issues previous. And so he's not really, what would you say, romantically available just yet. And then there's a blast from the past even, who shows up, and it's Betty Brant. So she was a stalwart supporting character back in the Steve Ditko era, and she got married to Ned Leeds, but they're having some marital difficulties, and they're speaking with a marriage counsellor, but they're still married at that time. And so she looks to get her old job back with Robbie Robertson here, and he agrees to it. And then, Peter and her are catching up. They used to date. And he says to her, then we're still friends? Always, Peter, always. And Glory here is a little bit mildly jealous here, thinking about my. I remember Betty telling me that she and Pete were a real item once upon a time, and now she's the old girlfriend. Times do change, don't they? But it's also a way for a new reader to find out the significance of the prior relationship between Peter and Betty. Again, going back to that Shooter era editorial mandate. So a phone call for Peter. It's Madame Webb on the line. He throws the receiver back to Glory to catch and races out of the office. And Betty thinks to herself, even when we were dating, Peter was always running off at a moment's notice. Some things never change, indeed. So he's up on the roof of the Daily Bugle building, changing into a Spider-Man costume. And the narrative caption here tells us everything. Webbing his street clothes into a protective cocoon, Peter switches to his costumed identity and is gone in mere seconds. And then this is a great establishing shot from John Romita Jr., another angle on the southern tip of Manhattan. Well, at the southern tip of Manhattan Island, the waters off historic Battery Park here suddenly bubble and churn, and who's emerging from the water except for Juggernaut, and that's a great panel of him there. And then just walking straight through obstacles, straight through the benches here, and knocking over the tree even. Doesn't even think to hop over the bench. And here he is, like swiping away cars that are in his path as he crosses onto the street, stops a truck in its tracks. Moments later, Spider-Man arrives on the scene. That's a great shot of Spider-Man, and he's on that John Romita Jr. or John Romita Sr. rather model that we've got here. So very much the recognizable model of Spider-Man that would have been seen in all kinds of merchandising, lunchboxes, pajamas, etc. It's this type of Spider-Man, and it looks really well here, breaking the panel border too. Nicely done. Although almost a bit of a tangent on the angle on the building, but it works. This is a great panel too, of him swinging down onto the aftermath of the Juggernaut's path. And what is also significant about this issue is it is the first meeting of Spider-Man and Juggernaut. They've never met before. Spider-Man doesn't know Juggernaut. Doesn't know who he is. So that's intriguing. So Juggernaut's making his way into the financial district, the Wall Street area, and he is a little bit testy because he thinks to himself, I hate these crummy, narrow streets. I need room, lots of room. Okay. So Spider-Man spots him. And he As I said, doesn't know him, target sighted. That guy may not be the Hulk, but he looks about as big. In fact, he looks like a big brown human tank. Question is, how do I stop him? And that's the big idea for this two-parter. How is Spider-Man going to stop the indestructible, the unstoppable Juggernaut? So, great DeLuca effect here as he bounces down on the back of Juggernaut's, onto Juggernaut's back, and bounces straight off, arcing high over the city street. Spider-Man executes a desperate mid-air backflip, landing feet first on the cornice of a nearby building. So, he's thinking to himself now, what's that guy made of? If I'd reacted any slower, I'd have hit this wall with a splat instead of a thump. That's what I get for being sneaky, I guess, he thinks. Well, a little webbing should hold him. Doesn't, of course. And Spidey's left there thinking, it's great, just great. He would have to have his own private force field. That makes it a little more difficult to stop him, but not necessarily impossible. And then more explanation for the new reader. With a practiced double tap of the palm switch, Spider-Man fires his webbing down between the buildings, quickly weaving a barrier across the street ahead of the lumbering behemoth. Will this stop the Juggernaut? No, of course not. And the moorings of the webbing on the building walls pulls right off. Shrugging free of the now slack net, Juggernaut walks on, never missing a step. So implacable, inexorable progress up the avenue. So Spider-Man's there thinking, criminy, he is in the Hulk's class. Given time, he would have snapped my webbing. So Spider-Man comes up with another plan, which is to create a tank trap for Juggernaut. He's almost in position, he thinks. All I have to do is draw his attention so he doesn't see the hole. So typical Spider-Man, yoo-hoo, laughing boy, want to play catch. So does catch Juggernaut's attention. Juggernaut falls into the hole and says as he falls in, is this hole supposed to hold me? And Spider-Man responds, that's the general idea, pal. Why don't you make yourself comfortable down there until the cops can? But boom, 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 under the roadway, and he smashes up out of the manhole. That's a cool panel there. And Spidey, of course, is aghast. Juggernaut, well, he certainly lives up to his name. Looks like there's just one way to stop him. So he jumps down right in front of Juggernaut. I love this detail where he bounces off his helmet. And Juggernaut tells him, out of my way, little man. So Spider-Man, of course, has super strength proportionate to that of a spider's. And this is great. This is a great panel here. A lot of work in this panel to get this, pull off this DeLuca effect as Spidey bounces around Juggernaut trying to restrain him. But 5 minutes later, this is ridiculous, he concludes. I'd be better off wrestling a tank. All I'm doing is wearing myself out. So, but Spider-Man won't give up. And this is a great thought out way that Juggernaut has to get Spidey off his back. So he goes straight into the side of this building. We've got the corner of the building there. Straight in and out the other side of the building. And he's dropped Spider-Man en route. That's really, really, really cool. Really well thought out. And he's made an absolute mess of the inside of the building too. There's people that need to be pulled out. But they've only had the wind knocked out of them. They're okay. Otherwise, nobody's dead. And then the phone rings. And of course, who is it? It's Madame Webb. And she's got some information for Spider-Man. I've perceived a word in connection with our foe. Does Sidorak mean anything to you? So Spidey thinks, yeah, maybe. So he's got an idea. But he tells her, and it's what the reader would be thinking, why not call the Fantastic Four the Avengers, somebody? And they can't be reached. And the editorial note tells us the reasons are to be found in Fantastic Four 241 and Avengers 219. They're not available to help Madame Webb. So Spidey makes his way to Manhattan's Greenwich Village in an arcane old Bleecker Street townhouse. And that is, of course, the residence of Doctor Strange. That's a really nice rendering of Doctor Strange's house by Romita Jr. and Jim Mooney. So he knocks on the window. Wong is there to open it up. And of course, Doctor Strange isn't around. But Wong is able to tell him that he does know about the Juggernaut and that he's supposedly unstoppable. Does he have any weak spots? Wong says he couldn't say. Perhaps he would do well to contact the X-Men. I understand he's done battle with them. Then the phone goes. It's Madame Webb, of course. What about the X-Men? And she responds, I already sensed their connection, but they are beyond reach at this time, as are the others you mentioned. So there's no hope. It all falls on Spider-Man's shoulders. He's got to deal with Juggernaut by himself. So he tells Wong to call the cops and cue them in on where Juggy's headed. And don't panic, he'll be right over. So out the window he goes and he swings uptown. That's a great shot as well, following in the trail of the Juggernaut's passage. So Juggernaut's getting shot at by the cops. That's to no effect, of course. But here, waiting for him across the avenue, unknown to the Juggernaut, many of the 36 policemen who wait for him down the street have also faced the Hulk before. These are the bravest of the brave, 36 crack patrolmen assembled under the command of Lieutenant Chris Keating as the NYPD Special Weapons Task Force. So it makes sense that in the Marvel Universe, Manhattan, there would be such a task force. So are they going to put a stop to the Juggernaut's progress? Great colour hold here, Juggernaut in magenta. They've got him in his sights. They throw everything at him, but he just keeps on walking through it all. Walks right through their sandbag barriers. And a few hundred feet past the breach barricades, he's at Madame Webb's apartment building, busts his way in the door. There's webbing in his way on the stairwell, but he takes care of that easily, ripping it free of the wall, what it was anchored on. And Spidey, of course, is in the apartment with Madame Webb. He's webbed up the doorway. And she has a plan, which is to hook up the emergency generator in the closet to the webbing on the door. Juggernaut's coming up to the door. The plan is to electrocute him. Is that going to work? Spidey pulls the levers. Juggernaut goes right through the door. And for an instant, the Juggernaut is transfixed, stopped just for an instant as the equivalent power of 1,000,000 volts arcs over his body. But Spidey thinks he's taking it, he's resisting it, and the system can't take the strain, it's overloading. Nothing can stop the Juggernaut. In the door he comes. That's a great image there of him breaking in through the door. Spidey's ready for him, bouncing around. Madame Webb is aghast, alarmed. It's all happening just the way she dreamt it. Spider-Man bouncing around Juggernaut. But the ceiling gives way before the bludgeoning power of Juggernaut's blows, and hundreds of pounds of plaster rain down, which takes Spidey out of the fight just for the moment. And Juggernaut pulls Madame Webb out of her life support chair, despite her protests. And she goes unconscious. And Juggernaut just can't figure out what's going on. What's wrong, he asks. You having some sort of fit? And Spidey says from beneath the plaster, you big dumb jerk, she's going into convulsions. That chair you yanked her out of it was a life support system. If you move her, she dies. Dies? Asked Juggernaut. Then I came all the way for nothing. It just drops her to the floor. She's of no use to me this way. So Spidey's horrified. You just can't walk away. And he thinks to himself, why? That callus bleeped out. My bruises must have bruises. So he comes over to Madame Webb and he gives her mouth to mouth just as the cops arrive. And then there is the ambulance outside. So Madame Webb goes into that. And Spidey thinks to himself, that lady asked me for help and I failed her. Just like I failed Uncle Ben and Captain Stacy and Gwen. Like the original sin and the subsequent compounding ones, the lives that he should have saved, and feels guilty forever after for not having done so. They all died because of me, because I screwed up, he thinks. As he swings onto the top of the building, it's nighttime now. Maybe it was impossible to save Madame Webb. I never did understand how that clairvoyant power of hers worked. And the dream predicted that Juggernaut would catch Madame Webb and defeat Spider-Man, at least in round one. And that came about and came true. But he continues to think, but impossible or not, that doesn't let me off the hook. She may be dying right now and it's my fault. Well, I'm not going to let Juggernaut get away with this. I'm going to find a way to stop that unstoppable human tank or die trying. It's a great close-up on his mask there, the eye. Really, really good stuff. Yeah, so indeed, a great part one to a famous two-parter. Spider-Man's first encounter and first fight with the Juggernaut. Quite thoughtful, this one, part one. Let's see how it all pans out in part two in due course. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on The Amazing Spider-Man number 229. If you enjoyed it, please like the video on YouTube. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.